Hello. I haven't made many YouTube videos, but I thought this project might be of interest, so here goes. I'd like to share with you my experience of making a clock for the very first time. This clock has 13 brass gears, weighs 50 pounds, and took 5 months to design and build. And it all started with an idea at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is my normal wake-up time now since retirement. For Christmas of 2024, after weeks of research and far too many YouTube videos, I bought my first CNC machine, a Carbide 3D Shapeco 5XL, including the 65mm VFD spindle kit. I'd spent years building woodworking projects, plaques, cutting boards, charcuterie boards, coasters, and everything carefully drawn first in CAD before a single cut was made. But until recently, everything was still done by hand with whatever power tools I had that would accomplish the task. One early morning, I decided I needed something more difficult, something that would take real patience, and something that would make me learn entirely new skills and work with materials I was not used to working. So, I chose to build a clock. I dove into clock design, gear ratios, and more math than I'd done in months. And after weeks of calculation in Excel, drawings, and revisions in Fusion 360, I developed a deep respect for the clockmakers of the 13th century. They did this without computers, and their clocks still run today. But eventually, I had a game plan. A 13-gear brass clock inside a zebra wood glass case. 13 gears might sound unusual, but as you'll see, that number came from a mistake that turned into a solution. I had never worked seriously with metals before, but I chose brass for the gears and plates. In hindsight, using thinner brass would have made it much cheaper and lighter. Lesson number one. And the first time I cut brass on the CNC, I broke several bits and invented a few new words. But after dialing in the feeds and speeds, the gears started coming out beautifully. Each one had its own design to make the final clock look unique. The most delicate part of drilling and threading tiny 2mm holes to hold the hubs to the gears and the gears to the shafts. I made custom jigs, held my breath more than once, and slowly it began to take shape. Using 4mm brass shafts that would fit into miniature flanged ball bearings, the shaft assemblies would be inserted into place and held in recessed mounted holes in the front and back plates that were cut during the CNC plate cutout. To connect these plates, I made 2 half-inch connecting brass rods threaded on both ends. Next came the main connecting rods, 1 3/4-inch round rod and 1 3/4-inch square rod chosen for effect and threaded on both ends. Brass cap nuts held all of the connectors in place. I began to assemble the hubs to the gear wheels and then the 2 cock assemblies that would be fastened to the front and back plates. Saving the front and back plates to last, and before I made a mistake and lose the exact amount of brass I have left, I made the plates on the CNC out of 1/4-inch MDF and then used those to make sure all the holes lined up properly. This was where all that design and measuring efforts in Fusion 360 really paid off, as those holes and cuts in each plate had to be very precise to allow for good shaft movement and motion. Being fairly confident that the Carbide Create Pro design was spot on, I began the cutting. And man, I got lucky. Just enough 3/16 brass left to make both plates. The clock has a second hand dial on the top and a minute-hour hand dial on the bottom. These dials were cut out of 1/8 inch brass and engraved to a total depth of 65 thousandths. After all edges were smooth and the dials thoroughly cleaned, I painted the markings with a black matte acrylic paint and applied it with a plastic syringe. The clock hands were ordered online from a clock parts vendor. I had originally planned on running this clock with a battery-operated quartz clock movement purchased online, but it became obvious that it would not have enough torque to move the second-hand gear wheel and all the sequential gears. The solution? A standard 12-volt brush DC 2 RPM motor and a 6 to 14-volt motor controller for precise speed adjustment. This would be powered by a 12-volt 25-amp power supply. Not wanting to see the motor housing and its labels, I designed and 3D printed a motor cover to look similar to the clock itself. And then came assembly day. The shafts, the bearings, the rods, piece by piece, it all came together. I held my breath and flipped the switch for the first test. And wow, it worked. Well, sort of. The hour hand was moving backwards. As it turns out, adding one extra 10-tooth gear for gear spacing had reversed the direction of the hour hand. The fix meant redesigning cock plates and adding another 10-tooth gear. That's how this became a 13-gear clock. So back to the workshop. Next problem, the gears kept locking up in the minute-hour gear train. After hours of watching the motion, I did not discover any conflicts with the gears and the mounting plates. But continuing to analyze the motion, I realized the gear teeth edges were so sharp they would bind. So I disassembled everything in the minute-hour gear train and carefully filed every tooth. Thousands of tiny strokes later, the gears now turned smoothly. I adjusted the motor speed, and finally, the clock kept perfect time. I needed to make a nice-looking case so that my better half would allow the clock into our home. So I designed a case made from zebra wood, one of my favorite woods, and tempered glass. Inside it, all those brass gears now moved quietly together, just like I'd imagined months earlier. Before completing, I engraved a plaque. I thought about adding my age, 80 years young, but my wife suggested that might not be necessary. She was probably right. 13 gears, hundreds of design hours, several broken bits, and more lessons than I can count. But a few things I've learned. I'd use thinner brass next time. An encoded motor would make better speed control. And good technical support is worth its weight in gold. A big shout out to the technical support folks at Carbide 3D, Servo City, and Online Metals. They were very professional and helpful to a very naive clockmaker. But I guess the biggest lesson learned? You're never too old to learn something difficult. You're never too old to start a new project. And sometimes a 5 a.m. idea can turn into something that just might outlive you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.